from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David." Please be seated. It was Easter morning, and I was sitting in this little Anglican church in Nicosia, Cyprus. It was during the midst of a year of living abroad. Me and a couple friends decided we would spend our Easter break on Cyprus. And we found ourselves at this Anglican church. And we stood as the service began, with the priest standing at the front of the room. And he spoke those familiar words, "Alleluia, Christ is risen." And without looking at my bulletin or the Book of Common Prayer in my hands, I felt the response rise up from within me. The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia. And I realized it wasn't just my voice saying it, but I was saying it in the midst of and along with everyone in this room. This little Anglican church was an interesting place at this sort of crossroads, as the island of Cyprus is. That's kind of in between Europe and Asia. That was part of the British Empire at one point, and then it was divided between Greeks and Turks, and it has this history, this long and deep history with Christianity, with Anglicanism. It was made, the people there sitting in that sanctuary were from all over the world. There were Americans like us, folks from the United Kingdom. There were people from parts of Africa, Nigeria, Cameroon. There were folks from all who had found their way to Anglicanism through one path or another. We made great friends with a Lithuanian guy who had somehow found Anglicanism. And we all spoke those same familiar words together. The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia. One of the gifts of being part of a liturgical tradition is that we have these words that we have inherited, that have been passed down from generation to generation. This Book of Common Prayer and the services in it trace their origins back to 1542 and to the first English prayer book. The first time that the liturgy was translated into the language of the people, out of Latin and into English. And so when we speak the words of our prayers on Sunday morning, though it may be a little more contemporary than what people were saying in the 1540s, the heart of those words is the same. That on Sunday mornings, folks around the world, in Nicosia, Cyprus, in parts of Africa, Australia, every continent in the world, are uttering those same words, those same prayers, those same forms that have been handed down to us. And there is a power in that tradition. And those words that we repeat week in and week out that have a way of sinking down into our bones. I've had so many conversations with folks who find that as their memories may be going, as their awareness of the world around them may be fading, so often it is those prayers, those repeated phrases, those words that are still with them, that they can still recall even as the rest of their memory begins to falter. And there is a power to that. A power to that shared vocabulary, those shared forms, that shared language of prayer. And yet prayer is also more than that. In our gospel reading today, we hear the story of this Canaanite woman. As Jesus is going towards Tyre and Sidon, walking through the villages into land that is no longer sort of Jewish territory, he encounters this Canaanite woman. This woman who is who is an ethnic other, who is someone from a different tribe, a different people, a member of the historic enemies of Israel. So much of the Old Testament is about this conflict, the contest over the very land itself between the Israelites and the Canaanites, the deep-seated enmity between these two groups. This Canaanite woman approaches Jesus, and she kneels before him and shouts to him, "Lord, have mercy. My daughter is possessed by a demon. Can you heal her?" And maybe as shocking as this outburst was, perhaps even more shocking is Jesus' response. Silence. He ignores her and continues on his way until finally his disciples come to him and say, "Lord, this woman won't leave us alone. Can't you do something about her? Send her away." And it's at that moment that she comes into the frame again. "Lord, help me." This time, Jesus doesn't meet her plea with silence, but with dismissal. "I have been sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Is it fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs?" Using an insult that would have been common or familiar to most Israelites about the Canaanites. He uses what amounts to a slur in talking to this woman. And yet she persists. She takes this phrase, this put down that Jesus offers to her, and turns it on its head. "Yes, but don't even the dogs receive crumbs from the master's table? Isn't it the case that there is more than enough food for all to eat, so that even the dogs leave full?" In that moment, something shifts. Jesus looks at her, and instead of once again dismissing her, he proclaims, "Great is your faith." And in that instant, her daughter was made well. What do we make of this encounter? What is it about? What do we make of Jesus' reaction of silence? Then his comment about the food being taken from the children and thrown to the dogs. Is this Jesus just being caught on an off day? Like a politician being caught on a hot mic saying something they didn't want the public to hear? Or is there something larger at work? Is this part of an illustration on Jesus' part to reflect the language that would have been familiar to his people, to the Israelites? Using this language about the dogs as a way to then, for the woman to turn it on its head, and for Jesus to reveal the problem in that logic. An occasion for Jesus to remind his disciples, this woman and everyone in that gathered crowd, that there is more than enough for all to eat. That God's mercy is not a finite resource that once spent can no longer be shared, but that God's mercy is something that exists in complete abundance, that is meant not only for the children of Israel, but for all people. And is it the case that this woman changes Jesus' mind? That he is somehow changed by this encounter? Or that they are working together in partners to reveal this truth about God's kingdom? Whatever it is, what we see is this story of a woman who comes to Jesus in prayer. "Lord, have mercy." Who implores him. This Canaanite woman, this woman who should have no place standing before Jesus, speaking to him, asking anything of him. This person, by her station in life, by both her gender, her ethnicity, her religious beliefs, should have nothing to do with Jesus. And yet there she is before him, giving voice to her heart's deepest desire, that her daughter would be made well. And she persists in this prayer, "Lord, have mercy. Lord, help me. Lord, make her well." She gives voice to something deep within her, this burning need. And she directs it to Jesus. Unyieldingly, unflinchingly, she persists in articulating it. And in the end, she receives the mercy that she is looking for. Her prayer is answered. God's love is with her. As nice as our liturgical forms of prayer are, and those familiar words and known phrases, and the nice structure of our collects and our confession and our services are, prayer is also about more than that. At its heart, prayer is a conversation with God. It is that ongoing conversation that we have in our moments of deepest need. In those times when we feel like we have nowhere else to turn, when all we can do is to say, Lord, help me. Prayer is that ongoing conversation that takes place over days, weeks, months, years, over the whole of our lives between us and our Creator, between us and the one who has redeemed us, the one who promises that we will have that God's mercy, that God's love, that God's care is with us. Prayer is that ongoing conversation that has taken place between God and God's people, going back to the first days of Adam and Eve in the garden and extending until that day in which all will be reconciled in God's new creation. That when we look to God and we articulate what it is that we need and desire, we are entering into that conversation. That we are standing there before God, inviting God's love to be with us, to dwell with us, to transform us, and to hold with us those things in our lives that we find are the most difficult, most pressing, most urgent. That in our life of prayer, we need those known words, those phrases. We need this book and the structure that it gives us because it teaches us how to pray. It gives us a language of how to connect to God, how to relate, how to share, lift our voice along with others. And yet we also need those ways of praying that are about articulating something that is happening deep within the depths, happening within the depths of our soul, within the depths of our spirit, that emanate out from us in those moments of need, those moments of care and concern for ourselves, for our children, for our parents, for our spouses, for our partners, for our loved ones, for those friends who are going through an impossibly difficult time. I think about those times in my life when prayer has been the most important. Yes, there are those moments that it takes a liturgical form, like that moment sitting in that Anglican church in Cyprus. But I think about those other moments when that was more spontaneous prayers were the only way that I knew how to deal with what was going on. I think about sleepless nights early in our children's lives when I'm just desperate to fall asleep. Francis or Jeremiah is sitting there crying in my arms. I'm rocking them back and forth. And all I can do is to lift up that prayer, Lord, help me. Or those moments after getting a call that one of my parents is in the hospital after a fall or some ongoing health condition. I think about those times after the death of a loved one, when in the depths of that grief, all I could do was say, Lord, help me. In those moments, those prayers, even when I didn't have words or vocabulary to put to them, when all I could say was, Lord, help. It was those moments that I was stood in the most in need of God's mercy, of God's love. I think we who come out of this liturgical tradition, it's easy for us to feel like if we don't have a prayer to point to, if there's no collect in the back of the Book of Common Prayer for a specific situation, that we don't really know how to pray in it. I grew up alongside folks who came out of a charismatic tradition, an evangelical tradition, and Pentecostal traditions who felt much more at ease with a sort of spontaneous prayer of the heart. And I think there's something that we can learn from them. There are times to break out of those familiar forms when all we can do is to simply stand before God and say, Lord, help me. What we see in this reading about the Canaanite woman who stands before Jesus is a woman who is undeterred in her prayer, who is willing to be open and vulnerable about what it was that she needed and desired, and to speak that before Jesus, for the people gathered to give voice to that deep need within her. We also see a trust in her, this faithfulness that believed fully that her prayer would not go unanswered, but that what she would receive in response was the assurance that God's love was with her. That even though she may not have been of God's chosen people, even though she was not of the house of Israel, even though she was not of that flock, that there was an abundance in God's mercy. An abundance that would not stop at lines of gender or ethnicity or religious belief, but that would extend to all people who with faith and hope and trust stood before Jesus and uttered those words, "Lord, have mercy." In those moments of need, may we, like the Canaanite woman, have the courage and relentlessness to open our hearts in prayer, to stand before God, opening our hearts and trusting that God's love is with us, that God's mercy is with us, that there is an abundance to God's love that knows no bounds, an abundance to God's love that even when we don't see the fruits of it is still at work within us, within the world, within the lives of those people who we lift up in our prayers. May we be bold in our faith, bold in our prayers, trusting that God's love is with us. Amen.